How's it going today, everybody? Brandon here, coming to you in the gallery and in the studio today. A quick kind of paint along tutorial, so to speak, on this one. This is going to be this painting here, this Golden Finch. This was a commissioned request that I had here recently that I finished up today. So if you want to have a look at the process of this one, let's go now. Alright, so what I have got here that I'm working with is a 12 by 16 canvas that I'm going to be doing this scene on here, and I've got my pencil sketch in here of my Golden Finch and just a couple of limbs that he's going to be sitting on. The rest of this background back here is just going to be like a faded, blurry, kind of distant background that's going to have browns and greens and stuff going on. I'm going to start with this 3/4 inch angled brush here to block my colors in, and I'm going to block in the bird first. So I'm going to go in basically the darker tones in the areas that they belong. Here I'm going to start with some yellow ochre, a little touch of raw umber, and some black and some white to kind of darken it, gray it a little bit, and just start blocking in my colors on this bird, starting with my yellows first. And ultimately in these areas I'm just going to be coming back over it and highlighting it with the lighter feather highlights and textures. So I'm just putting in the darker areas where they belong. The beak here is mostly a dark red-orange mix with some brown, and then putting in black here on the top of the head and using gray in the areas that I'll ultimately come back over here with white highlights, and then putting in the black on the rest of the feathers and the wings where those areas of color belong as well. Alright, I'm going to be switching here to a 3/4 inch flat wash brush that I use a lot for my backgrounds and stuff. So that's what I'm going to be using here to do this background with. And this is just a faded, kind of out of focus background. So I'm going to be graying these colors out a lot with greens and browns in the mix, and a little bit of the pinks and whites from the flowers that are on these branches in the background. The key is to keep those saturations down. So I'm going to gray everything out to make it look a little further off, and no sharp lines and edges if I can help it, to make everything look a little out of focus. So it may take one or two passes of putting the color in to achieve the right look, but that's what we're going for. So I'm following a reference photo that this client gave me fairly closely, but you know, you don't have to do things exact, especially if you're just painting along with this and want to create something similar. But just keep your saturations down, gray your colors out, and put in a background that represents what you want to see in terms of colors and what might be going on in the distance. And blocking in this background layer, this is really just a deal of mixing greens with some black and some white to gray it out, keep the saturation down, and then throwing some brown, some raw umber in there in some areas as well, and getting an initial pass of color on the canvas, and then after that dries a little bit, coming back in and working some more of that same color over the top, just to kind of get rid of all of the sharp edges. I don't want any sharp edges back here, trying to keep everything faded and distant and, for lack of better words, fuzzy looking, so it doesn't look very close to the viewer. That way the foreground bird and images of the limbs that the bird is sitting on is going to pop. I'm bringing in a little bit of the white and pink mix that's going to be those flowers that are off in the distance on those limbs that are also not in focus. Also, again, keeping the saturations of those colors down, just because we don't want them being very vibrant. Okay, now I'm going to be switching over to a little 1/2 inch angled brush to start putting in a couple of foreground leaves that are much closer to the viewer here. They're going to be a lot more saturated in color, so I'm going to be using some greens here, some sap green, some grass green, and maybe some medium yellow values and stuff to bring in some more saturated foreground leaves here. Putting in these leaves now is just a matter of going into much more saturated green with some yellow here and there for highlights, maybe a touch of titanium white in a few places to make a few of the edges pop. But just really going up, bumping up the saturations now so these leaves appear much closer to us and pop against that faded background. The limb detail here is really just darkening everything up initially with some raw umber and some black, and then coming back and highlighting over it with a little bit of yellow ochre and some titanium white in some places to highlight out where the light reflection is. The couple of flowers here attached to these foreground limbs is just basically a mixture of titanium white going in with a little medium red, and then touching it off with a little bit of Quinacridone Magenta. Now our bird details are essentially just that, smaller brushes now going in here with small spotter brushes and liner brushes and using mixtures of medium yellow and a bright yellow that I have here, along with some titanium white, putting in individual little feather texture details where they belong, trying to watch closely with my source photo that the customer here provided with that they wanted painted. So I'm just paying attention where these colors belong and trying to add in little details, one little step at a time, one little layer at a time to build it up. The last bit of details on the wings and tail is just using a mixture of white and black and a little bit of blue in there to gray out the areas that are white in color, and then putting a little bit of brighter white highlights on top of it, and then just putting in a few individual lines along the black areas of the wing as well to create a little bit of the idea that there are individual feathers laying in there as well. And so there we have my finished product of this golden finch sitting there on that limb. This has been a pretty fun project to work with. If you painted along, hopefully you got something you're happy with. So until next time, everyone, happy painting.